Well, most definitely, Reiko's last chord woke us up. So good morning, it's great to see you all. I'm going to guess some of our dear friends and members of our community had a late night at Outer Lands and just couldn't find their way to church this morning, but they're with us in spirit. I want to welcome you all, and I want to share these opening words from one of my favorite writers and poets, Annie Dillard. We are here to abet creation and to witness to it, to notice each other's beautiful face and complex nature, so that creation need not play to an empty house.
And now, please join me in saying the words of our chalice lighting, which are printed in your order of service. We light this chalice for the light of truth, the warmth of love, and the fire of commitment. We light this symbol of our faith as we gather together. Each Sunday, we take a moment to greet one another. Please reach out to someone that you don't already know and introduce yourself. And there will be a musical cue when it is time to be seated.
Now we invite you to stand if you're willing and able, and we'll recite our covenant and sing our doxology, printed in your order of service. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its prayer. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, and to help one another.
time for our ritual of remembrance and commitment. We recognize that there is human suffering all over this world, wars declared and undeclared, the endless violence, racism, and the scourge of white supremacy that ravage our nation, leaving scores dead on our streets, our homes of worship, our communities, and our schools. August 9th marks the 5th anniversary of the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. We ring a gong to remind us of our obligation to commit ourselves to the ongoing work of justice and peace. In honor of those children who lost their lives this year in federal custody at detainment camps, we will ring our gong 8 times to remember also those adults who have lost their lives in the camps. We remember the children and adults who have died trying to cross into our country, and to all those whose economic distress or conditions of violence at home move them to do the same. We remember the 70,000 adults currently held in camps and the 11,000 children separated from their families. We will ring the gong 9 times, 8 in remembrance of the lives of those children who died, and a 9th time to remember the lives of those killed and injured in the communities of El Paso, Gilroy, and Dayton. In the week ahead, may we commit to ease the tide of human suffering however we can. So please join us on the sanctuary steps at 12:30 for a vigil of remembrance and commitment. Join me now in a time of reflection, prayer, and meditations of the heart. Breathe in. Feel your heart open. Breathe out. Feel your heart centered. Feel the presence of those around you. Feel the presence of love that abides in you and within all of us. This morning, we remember the life of the great Toni Morrison, writer, artist, teacher, activist, visionary, who died this week. I share these words from the writer Roxane Gay. The best we can honor Toni Morrison's legacy is to remember her as the astonishing and brilliant and very human woman she was. It is in her humanity that made her so extraordinary. Today, we hold in our hearts the people of Hong Kong, the people of Kashmir, and to all the people seeking to live in peace, free from war and conflict, oppression and hatred. We are with you. To all in need of healing, of hope, of home and safety, we are with you. To those in our community in need of our prayers and love, we are with you. Let us join hearts for a time of silent reflection.
The most beautiful things in this world cannot be seen or even heard, but must be felt with the heart. It's written on a building downtown. Helen Keller said it. There is no time here, but Vermont seasons really mean it when they happen. So many images come to mind as I see myself as a child chasing lightning bugs, capturing fireflies in a mason jar to light up our rooms. When I was a child, I was taught a love and respect for nature by my botany professor father, Franklin Adams, who was a wonderful mixture of Jacques Cousteau and Donald Duck. The fall of brightly colored leaves, reds, orange, yellow, even purple, cushion the path with the beauty of nature's psychedelic display. Rabbits, foxes, raccoons, owls. My father studied and taught at the University of New Hampshire. My siblings and I lived in a place called Forest Park Apartments, of which I especially recall the woods. Our camping trips, canoeing, fishing, the lakes and streams, sometimes just collecting specimens for Dad. My siblings and I were often climbing trees, hiking, building forts, and finding secret hideaways. Out there, we could be Robin Hood, the Lone Ranger, the Three Musketeers, and we were nature scientists. There were these thick green bushes about 3 feet high. You could crawl under into a sort of central den of isolation. When alone in the woods, we could hide there and others would walk by just feet away and we would go undiscovered. When alone in the woods, only the sounds of the wind in the trees, birds, a dog far away, the clickety-clackety sound it makes when you put baseball cards on your bicycle spokes. Only the sounds and smell of the woods would comfort me whenever I got in what I call a Dennis the Menace mood. The woods would comfort me. The very air we breathe is crisp as an apple. It was a true Dennis the Menace morning on November 22nd, 1963, and for a timeout, I was sent to the office for chalk. But the office was fractured. People were crying. Adults. And when I asked for the chalk, I was told to go back to my classroom and tell the teacher that the president had been shot and the bell would ring early. Wow. This was a very big deal. I ran back into my classroom and tried to tell Mrs. Watson, but she slapped my cheek hard. Said, "Don't ever say anything like that again." There was even a handprint on my face, I was told later. But then the bell did ring early, and Mrs. Watson sat down as I, crying, holding my wounded cheek, walked across the UNH campus with my big brother and my little sister. I burst into the living room ready to tell Dad about the teacher. He shushed me angrily. He was just feet from the TV watching the coverage of JFK's assassination. I ran away to my forest hideaway and just lay there feeling the earth under my back, smelling the pines, hearing the other kids playing, thinking if I ever got to be a teacher, I would never hit my students. Well, as the dusk gathers itself and the November temperatures begin to plummet, I thank my secret fort for being there for me always. Some squirrel or something up above in the trees drops something. It's the final signal that even a very bad and sad sort of day will eventually end. I trundle towards home for its warm comfort.
As we prepare to take this morning's offering, I want to hold up gratitude for this fort that holds our stories too, for the gift of community, for the ministries that we bring to one another and out into the world. This morning's offering will now be received.
This reading is a short poem called Micro Minutes on Your Way to Work by Brenda Hillman. Days are unusual. The owl sends out 5 zeros from the pines, plus 1 small silver nothing. Where do they float? Maybe out to sea where jellyfish are aging left and right. They have some nerve. Today, no new wars, probably. No big button. The owl could be your scholar of trapped light, or Walter Benjamin, who writes, "A storm blows in from paradise." Thinking through these things each week, you cross the bridge, gold coils, fog, feelings. Syllables also can grow younger, like those jellyfish. You bring your quilt of questions in the car. At work, you'll have to be patient at the risky enterprise of talking to other people. So little progress in this since the Pleistocene. Mostly, though, you're calm when traveling. Silver nothing, moving right and left. Day releasing the caged stars. One thought mixed with no thought, packed with light.
If you don't know Brenda Hillman, and I didn't know of her till recently, she's a Bay Area poet, and I think she's married to the poet Robert Haas. So someone to keep an eye for. So before I wanted to get into the sermon, I wanted to do a sound meditation. And so it's been a tradition the last few years, if you can say a few years equals a tradition, to do a service about time. And so today we're going to explore the idea of deep time. And to help us connect to the story, we're going to spend a few minutes in a sound meditation listening to deep time. The sound of glaciers, cave ice melt, ancient Amazon forests, deep earth, deep space, deep ocean. The writer Robert Macfarlane refers to this deep time sound as the landscapes of the undersong, the substrate sounds of a given place, the ambient murmur that goes often unheard, or at least unlistened for. So this morning, let's listen in. Our neighbor, Mr. Kazaropel, loved to visit Purgatory and was always happy to take us kids along for the ride. And Mr. Kazaropel was a fireman, so he was a good guy to have around if things went wrong. A few times each summer, he'd pack us into his station wagon, 3 deep in the back, 3 stuffed into the back seat, and 2 wedged up into the front. Seatbeltless, mind you. Mr. Kazaropel pulled the wagon out and headed west towards Purgatory, a mere 30 miles door to door. Purgatory was cool. Really cool. Cave cool. Purgatory is Purgatory Chasm State Reservation, a geological preserve in Sutton, Massachusetts. At the end of the Ice Age, some 14,000 years ago, a melting glacier deposited huge rocks, forming a chasm. Now, Purgatory Chasm got its name from early colonists unfamiliar with the geological deep time story. They believed that the devil stomped on the grounds, forcing the granite rock to split open. There was no better playground than Purgatory. We clambered over rocks and climbed the rock formation, traversed the caves, making our way through the corn crib, reaching the heights of the pulpit, and peering over Lover's Leap. We inched our way along and through Fat Man's Misery, which Mr. Kazaropel always declined. Inside the caves of Purgatory, we became deep time travelers in search of a story that cracked the wide rock open. Now, I lost interest in the devil a long time ago, but the story of geological time, deep time, and our relationship to it intrigues me. How are we part of this ongoingness of time? I wonder what role we might play in the coming chapters. Before we arrived on the block, time unfolded through eons and epochs: the Precambrian, the Paleozoic, the Mesozoic, the Cenozoic, mere billions of years ago. We stand on the thick accumulation of those Underland stories. If our hope is to be part of the ongoingness, caretakers and co-creators, we need to imagine ourselves as part of deep time. That recognition, nature writer Robert Macfarlane says, might help us to see ourselves as part of the web of gift, inheritance, and legacy stretching over millions and millions of years to come, bringing us to think that we leave behind for the epochs and the beings that will follow. These days, we travel at the speed of instanticity, leaving little room to contemplate our relationship to deep time. In our rush to move things along, we've entered what some scientists call the Anthropocene, our current location in geological time. While its roots go back to the industrial age, the Great Acceleration, members of the Anthropocene Working Group mark their calendars on a sunny day in June 1945, when the first nuclear weapon was detonated in New Mexico. Its traces, like ancient fossils, are all around us. In a mere 50 years, our relationship to time has shifted. If there is a gift to be found in the Anthropocene, it's the promise of our great awakening. Let's hope we can set down our smartphones long enough to be stirred into action. How you connect to the deep time story depends on how you see it. Macfarlane asks us to look beyond the horizon, past what he calls flat ontology. Ontology being a fancy word to describe the nature of being. A flat ontology is a pessimistic philosophical point of view that says life is insignificant, story over. In other words, fatalism. What our time requires is the opposite. We need a scintillating ontology, a bright-eyed ontology that relishes the relationships between things. In those scintillating ontological relationships, sparks fly. The movers and shakers behind this ontological movement will include artists and activists, thinkers, lovers of life who are drawn into the deep story that lies beneath our feet and stretches to the far ends of space. The job description for being a scintillating ontologist is to keep the deep time story going. There's one such ontologist who can be found deep inside a cave in a potash mine operation in Yorkshire, England. His name is Christopher Toth, a scientist who spends his days and nights inside a cube called the Drift, trying to catch the faint breath of a particle wind that blew through space billions of years ago and is assumed buried deep inside Earth's core. Toth trains his eye to look for a trace fossil of time, the cosmic treasure buried deep inside the dirt. When asked what keeps him there, searching, he said, "Everything is scintillation." Toth searches in the darkness, seeking to find the spark of life. Throughout much of our human history, across cultures and traditions, in the caves and crevices, the mountains, the forests, the glaciers, the oceans, the rivers, the rhythmic oscillations, the formations, the shifts, we searched for signs of life embedded into the strata of deep time. As we march into the Anthropocene, will we remember to stop and to listen? Keep searching for the distant spark in hope that we stay connected to the deeper story. Let me share a personal story about seeking that connection. When I was in seminary, I studied with Joanna Macy, a committed deep ecologist and Buddhist scholar. In a day-long workshop, Joanna led us on a deep time journey, traveling back to the birth of the cosmos, mingling in Earth's long creation story, moving through the eons and the epochs of geological time. Finally, we arrived and stood on the savannah under a glowing sun, looking forward across the horizon. time sped up, and we found ourselves in the shadow of the soaring towers of a nuclear reactor, rising out of the ground like some kind of medieval cathedral. Standing before the monoliths, the elders called us to witness and worship. In the face of mass destruction, we were asked to stay in the story, see ourselves as an integral part of it, a story of our own making. It could have been easy to flee, claim myself a card-carrying member of the flat ontologist clubs, and run for the hills. But in that imagined, unimaginable moment, sensing the impending doom, I stayed put and tried to stay present. That day, something shifted, or maybe it stirred. I walked out into the gray autumn sky. I greeted the trees, marveling at how the leaves just fall. My lips kissed the air. I smiled at the people walking by, just going about their day. That day, my sense of time, my relationship to time, it shifted. Deep inside the Chabot caves in France are the oldest cave paintings ever found. The archaeologist Simon McBurney reflects, perhaps this is what truly separates us from the makers of this art. It is not the space of time, but the sense of time. It wasn't measured, it unfolded day into night, moving through the seasons. Now, we carve up time in the name of efficiency and profit, giving way to the speed of instanticity. We look to beat time, save time, find time, bend time. It's as if we've lost touch with how to move through time, be part of its unfolding, attuned to and attentive to its rhythms. How do we get our groove back? Those early artists offer a clue. We'll never know why they created the paintings. We are left to infer and imagine. When we look at the cave drawings or earlier prehistoric art forms dating back hundreds and thousands of years, they spark our imaginations, illuminating the long, rich tale of time. I like to imagine that the human species evolved to appreciate creation. But times have changed, and somewhere along the timeline, we disconnected from the original creation story. It's time to reconnect, sense our bodies moving to the deep beat and rolling into that age-old groove. When we find ourselves in that moment, we will arrive at what the environmental philosopher Glenn Albrecht calls the symbiocene, from the Greek symbiosis, meaning companionship. In the groove of the symbiocene, we move in ways that reinforce life-producing forms in the living systems. Which brings me to church. This sanctuary, built of ancient stone and redwood, the grains of sand heated to high temperatures to create these beautiful stained glass windows. Here, inside the pocket, we search for the sparks that connect us to one another. We listen for the cracks in the chasms as our hearts break open, sensing the beauty and the pain sensing the beauty and the pain. In a flash, we look deep into the horizon, beyond the flat ontology that has taken hold. We feel something move and give way to the groove. We feel the beat beneath, the pulse beneath our feet, connecting us to the hallowed ground from which we came. Time will tell what the next chapter will be. I think of Dennis's fireflies in the jar, pulsing and sparkling like stars in the dark. I think of the deep woods where stillness gave him time to move through despair. What shape and direction will we give our story? The artist Makoto Fujimura practices the centuries-old art form known as kintsugi, mending broken pottery using a lacquer dusted with gold. The art is not to hide what is broken, but in the mending, create something beautiful. The golden lacquer, like a light, illuminates the story. With our hands and our eyes, we follow the traces. Kin in Japanese is the word for gold. Desuki means mend, but also means to link the generations together, writes Fujimura. And then I reimagine the imagined congregation circling around those nuclear reactors. I think of the cloud of witnesses keeping watch over those entrapped in the camps. I think of the gatherings of people through time who stood, spoke out, sang in the name of love, of peace and justice, and the beauty and the bounty of the planet. I remember that despite it all, we come together to offer help, to be in the struggle, to never give up. We find a way to put the pieces together and bring beauty back into the world. May luck be with us as we learn our parts in the song of the Symbiocene. May we be worthy companions, menders and healers, mappers and cartographers, wise movers, soul-filled shakers, endeavoring to pick up the pieces, and together tracing the storyline, stewarding to the landscape for those yet to come. Before we go, imagine you've made a time capsule holding the story of your life, one that will be found in the future far, far from now. Eons pass. A being discovers your time capsule. Maybe it surfaced from the sediment of the ocean or river. Maybe it was found deep in a cave. Maybe it slipped out of the ice. No matter. The finder carries a pouch of gold dust and a bottle of lacquer and lays the pieces before them. Gently blending the dust and lacquer, they form an elixir. With the eyes of an artist and the hands of a healer, they go about the slow work of putting the pieces together, bringing your story to life. What will be your story in this ongoingness of time? When I surfaced out of the chasm in purgatory, resting against the rock, beneath me I felt the beat and the groove, or maybe for the first time, I heard my heart beat, sensing the deep connections, the idea that we are forever entwined in the story of time, and that, in the moment, seemed miraculous. Let me close our time with the words from the writer and geologist Kim Marie Walker. Our collective footprints dent deeply our exquisite planet and billow beyond our stratosphere. I speak for my ancestors whose climate change consciousness began as survivors of the transatlantic enslaving trade. I speak for my way back ancestors, Homo erectus, who almost 2 million years ago witnessed the Pleistocene Earth and flourished and evolved because of climate cooling. At times, I am both frightened out of my wits and happy, dancing with hope to be alive at this time, pondering the systems of the earth, its cycles of dying and changing. Let us continue that journey together. Let's come together And make connection by reaching out in hand or just being close, whatever's comfortable. In this leaving, let us hold on to this, the enduring of love, the remembering of joy, the persistence of hope, the receiving of gratitude, the offering of grace, and the blessing of peace. Peace be with you all.